Buckwheat has become my favorite warm season forage crop for my pigs to eat. However, I bet that if you're willing to give buckwheat a try, it'll quickly become one of your favorite warm season forage crops for pigs, especially if you live in a climate that has a long period of time to grow warm season crops without frosts. And as an added bonus, beneficial insects, deer, turkey, all kinds of wildlife, even your chickens and cows love buckwheat. I'm Rob from Dowdle Family Farms, and I'm on a mission to grow more of our swine feed on our farm that our pigs can graze while producing happy, healthy pigs and wonderfully tasting pork. And I want to help you do the same. Since I started grazing our pigs on cover crops 3 years ago, buckwheat has become the most important warm season forage for our pastured pigs, and it is the most undervalued forage for pigs as well. If you Google cover crops for pigs or forage crops for pigs, chances are you'll come across several different articles, and most of them will reference alfalfa, clovers, and then a bunch of tender grasses and brassicas. Chances are you won't even find buckwheat on the list unless your search shows up 3 YouTube results like mine did that just show my videos about cover crops for pigs. You see, in Mississippi, we grow clovers over the winter. We plant them in the fall or sometimes in the deep winter through frost seeding. We let them grow over the winter and then graze them in the spring. Sometimes as early as March, but usually it's April and May. We have 4 to 6 months of production for 1 to 2 months of actual grazing time. And that grazing window is very, very narrow for the prime nutrition for those clovers. A lot of people will mention Bermuda grass. Well, Bermuda grass is a tough grass, and it can withstand some rooting because of the stallings. They say it'll offer some nutrition for pigs, and I'm just here to tell you, pigs will graze Bermuda grass if all they've got is grain, but typically, pigs won't touch the Bermuda grass until all the buckwheat is gone. You see, most of these recommendations come from people who may look at stuff in theory and say, hey, you can replicate part of the pig's diet with this forage, but realistically, you're not gonna replace the substantive portion of the pig's nutrition with these forages. And so they're just looking for stuff that the pigs won't completely kill. But I'm here to tell you, buckwheat is a phenomenal forage that's undervalued, and I think it's primarily for 3 different reasons. Like a lot of other crops, some people are just scared of buckwheat because they see that there are some potential health hazards of grazing it. Primarily because of photosensitivity or Sunscald. You see, buckwheat has a chemical in it, phygypyrin or something like that, that does make animals, people as well, more sensitive to sun. But here's what I've noticed. As you can tell behind me, most of our pigs are fairly dark-skinned, and I've noticed very little, if any, Sunscald or photosensitivity because of grazing buckwheat with our pigs. Understand, I'm not saying that it can't happen or won't happen. I'm just saying that I haven't had any experience with it, but we do have dark-skinned pigs, and we do offer our pigs shade. Always offer your pig shade during the summer. And also, we don't feed buckwheat exclusively, and I would never ever recommend feeding one exclusive diet for your pastured pigs. I think part of the reason also is that there were some studies published in the 70s and 80s that talked about how pigs did not prefer buckwheat when it was mixed with a grain ration. In fact, they mentioned that it was the least palatable, and it took pigs several hours to eat their rations because of the buckwheat. Here's the thing. I'm not real worried about it because, in my observation, pigs love grazing buckwheat, and they often graze it over other crops, unless, of course, they've had a lot of buckwheat and not much chicory or something else. And I suspect that older research just hasn't been updated or tested. Which leads me to the third thing. For the last 3 decades, people haven't been grazing pigs on pasture that much. Yes, there are a handful of really, really large producers. There are a lot of producers about my size, and then there are even more producers that will grow 5 or 10 a year. But the vast majority of pigs for the last 3 decades have been raised in confinement, and that's where the money and the research goes because that's where the pigs are raised. There haven't been that many people to try and test and validate the research. I think those are the main 3 reasons that people aren't focusing on buckwheat that much. But now while we're over here on this part of the farm, let me explain why I value buckwheat so much as a warm season forage. Despite what I've thought at one time, and despite what many people will tell you, pigs can process forages fairly well, especially those succulent, protein-rich forages. Unfortunately for people like me that live in moderately cool winters and hot, long summers, most clovers don't do anything during the summer. We plant in the fall and they're done by May, sometimes June if we're lucky. Now the warm season forages that I'm walking through right now have died. We've had several days of real long, hard frost and freezes. So the forage soybeans, the cowpeas, the sorghum Sudan grass, and all those other warm season forages are dead as a doornail. Even though those warm season legumes like cowpeas and forage soybeans are high in protein, they have so much lignin that the pigs just don't process them very well, and they're not the most palatable. That's why we need a more succulent forage like buckwheat. The second reason I like it is because of that high lysine level. You see, we've got to have high lysine levels if we want to reduce our grain costs and feed a substantive portion of our pigs' nutrition with crops. When I got my first Berkshire breeder pigs, they were underweight at about a year old, and they only weighed about 225 to 250 pounds. And so most of the time with breeder pigs, we'll feed them 4 to 6 pounds of grain per day. But if I need them to gain weight, I'll give them 6 to 8 pounds. For a little over 2 months, I averaged giving them 1 1/4 pound of grain per pig per day, and in those 2 months, they each put on about 60 pounds of muscle per pig. Not just pregnancy weight, muscle weight, frame weight, body condition. At the time, I estimated that I reduced my feed costs by 75% for the time that I fed that, but it was really closer to 85 or 90% based on what they needed, 7 or 8 pounds of grain per day for that extra frame growth. That's the reason why I love buckwheat, because it has that high lysine level that pigs need to really pack on the weight. One thing about pigs that people don't often pay much attention to, hey mama, is that little pigs under about 50 pounds have a more difficult time processing the proteins and amino acids in soybean meal. That's one reason why we try to keep our pigs nursing on their mothers a little bit longer so that they gain a little bit more weight. Now these little piglets over here are old enough to wean, but I've got their mother segregated from these other breeder pigs so that she has free access to grain whenever she wants it. The few times that I've grazed buckwheat with younger pigs, they performed really well on it. Now younger pigs don't process forages as well as older pigs do, but I suspect that the type of protein that we find in buckwheat, even though it's a lower percentage of protein, I suspect that the makeup of that protein is more conducive for grazing pigs. So if I had pigs that were under 100 pounds especially, I would have them grazing buckwheat whenever I could. Those are the 3 reasons buckwheat has become a favorite of mine, because of the nutritional levels. But the other reasons buckwheat has become one of my favorite crops to grow for pigs is because of more practical reasons. The 4th reason buckwheat has become one of my favorites is because it has a very short time to maturity. In 30 to 45 days, I can have a 2.5 to 3.5 foot tall stand of buckwheat forage for my livestock to graze. That's 1 to 2 tons of dry matter per acre for the pigs. That is phenomenal. And if I give that buckwheat 70 to 90 days, I'll have grain that I can graze, and the pigs love the grain even more than the forage. You see, so many crops take months to produce the bulk of their forage. Cereal rye, clovers, cowpeas, and many others. Which leads to the 5th reason, because I can grow successive crops of buckwheat time and time again. You see, once I graze the buckwheat, I can easily reseed it. Then come back another 30 or 60 days and graze it again. But most of the time, I let the buckwheat go to seed. Then the pigs graze it. They won't get all the seed. In fact, they'll miss a large majority of the seed. And then it will regrow on its own. And then once I move the pigs off and we get some rain, that buckwheat seed will germinate and I can get multiple successive crops, sometimes up to 3. One time I got 3.5 crops of buckwheat off of it in a growing season. And that allows it to pair well with something like sorghum Sudan grass that's going to regrow very well. It saves costs, cycles the fields over and over. It continues to build organic matter. And by keeping multiple crops of buckwheat in several different fields growing at once, the wildlife, beneficial insects love it. And of course, even if I graze it before it goes to seed, I can still broadcast more and get another stand. But I think one of my favorite reasons for growing buckwheat is because it is the easiest plant to grow, especially if you want to do it no-till without any equipment. Now you can disc it in, you can drill it, you can broadcast it. It's just easy to plant. But if you have limited tools, you can get by with just a weed eater or a lawnmower. You see, oftentimes there's a little bit extra weeds or forage that the pigs don't graze when I plant it. And I can just broadcast the seed into that and then mow it or weed eat it. And that little bit of cover for the seed will allow the seed to go on and germinate and grow once we get some rain. If you're a small producer and don't have a tractor or don't have a disc or don't want to spend an hour on a disc for a 1 acre field of buckwheat, it is easy to plant it. You see, for most producers, the ability to plant the buckwheat without the equipment, we have a no-till drill, I have a disc, I have a tractor. I could plant it easily enough. But the ability to just broadcast the seed and mow, bush hog, or weed eat over the ground to allow a little bit of cover just before a rain makes things so much easier. You see, even in years like this last one where I planted over 50 acres of buckwheat, I only planted about 1 to 2 acres at a time. But it's so nice to just run out real quick, broadcast by hand or with a tractor, a lawnmower, or four-wheeler, the seed, and not have to hook up the drill or not have to hook up the disc and not spend that additional time. If you're raising pastured pigs and you want to grow cover crops or forage crops to reduce your grain costs, the warm season cover crop that needs to be in your mix is buckwheat. To be on the safe side, I graze it only with dark-skinned pigs and make sure they have some shade when you're grazing it. But if you'll give it a try, I have a feeling that you'll be impressed with buckwheat as well. Have you ever given buckwheat a try? How do you plant it? How do you grow it as a cover crop? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments. Y'all take care and have a great day.